We talk about jumping out of an airplane and planting a church in enemy-occupied territory. It's important to know that Jesus made the huge jump from heaven to earth. Jesus was the ultimate airborne commando. It took guts to jump into this sin-infested world. It's going to take that for all of us.
All the forces gathered in the 20-year sinking period. And this reign of terror to ensue. One prominent defense with Western to peace and neutrality, and with the desirability of domestic harmony in the face of the foreign situation.
Anybody who signs away their life and joins any kind of boot camp knows that it takes guts. What you're saying when you enlist in boot camp is, I'm not tough enough to accomplish this mission. I need this boot camp to make me tough, to make me hard, to make me have the endurance that I need to survive out there. We're talking about jump school as a way to prep you to get ready to make that jump so that you don't tap out when it gets tough. Paul lists a whole array of qualifications that any church planner or anyone who's going into ministry needs to have. When Paul talks about these qualifications, he's basically listing off the qualities that a church planner ought to have after he's been through the school of hard knocks and gone through his basic training. You can take all those qualifications and boil them down into 3 basic areas. Those 3 areas have to do with going the distance. Any soldier that gets out there has to go the distance. He has to keep his commanding officer's orders at the forefront of his mind, and he will not stop until it's mission accomplished. If your team's going to pick a fight with the enemy, they've got to get ready for the return blow. In Ephesians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul says that the enemy's coming in for a blow, and you got to be strong enough to stand. Therefore, you need to stand in the power of the Lord's might. You and I aren't strong enough to take on this enemy that we're facing. When it comes down to church planning, we need the power of the Spirit of God to transform our character, to transform our marriages, to transform our ability to handle all of these things. Jesus never tapped out. Jesus kept going. And Paul looks to Jesus when he considers his own hardship in church planning. He talks about being beaten, whipped, stoned, being ripped apart by wild beasts. None of this was new to Paul. And in fact, Paul says at one stage, therefore I fill up in my body what was lacking in the sufferings of Christ. That may sound like a confusing passage, but what Paul is saying at the bottom line is this: if I'm going to reach people, then like Christ, there's more suffering to be done, and I'm ready to take it. Those are powerful words, but then frontline mission has always come with a price tag. The most important church planting partner that God has given any of us is our spouses. It's really important to remember that regardless of what the makeup is of your team or who's on it, that no one is more important to you than your spouse. That's why when Paul lists off the qualifications, he always mentions the spousal relationship first, because that more than anything else can be either your biggest strength or your biggest hindrance. It can be the Achilles heel of any minister. Because at the end of the day, every single person on your team is their own worst enemy. And that's the door that Satan often tries to get through to take a ministry team down. Therefore, give the most important time and the most important attention to your number 1 church planting partner, your spouse. Because in ministry, it tends to add up pressure in addition to the normal pressures of life and any kind of pressure that's on ministry. Being in a church plant is like being suddenly put in a pressure cooker. And if you don't give attention to one another, the whole thing can blow up suddenly. That's why Paul comes around and he says, therefore, if a man doesn't lead his own family well, how in the heck is he going to lead the family of Christ? A lot of guys think that gifting is actually a substitute for character. And that's like jumping out of an airplane and refusing to pack your parachute in the right way. What's going to happen is no sooner do you jump, your parachute gets all tangled up. by having your character and your marriage sound. That's like packing your parachute the right way to ensure that you make it to your target zone. If this were real estate, we'd be saying location, location, location. But this isn't real estate. Location is secondary in church planning. We're talking ministry. Therefore, character is primary. Therefore, Paul lays out in his qualifications, character, character, character. The old saying is true. Men are always looking for methods, but God is looking for a man. And not just any man or woman. God is looking for people whose character so shines that others can see Jesus. Why is character so important? Because number one, you're going to be talking about a supernatural God who's able to transform people and set people free. It's not just that Jesus can forgive us for the guilt of sin, but also that He can liberate us from the power of sin. And until you're laying hands on people and praying for drug addicts to immediately get set free, you don't begin to have a taste of what God really wants to do in a community. The important thing is that you yourself are not entangled by sin. Paul is not by any means saying that you have to be perfect. What he is saying is that you must not be in bondage. You must not be addicted. You need to be the model of someone who himself or herself has been set free by the power of the grace of God. God isn't just looking for warm bodies to parajump into an area that doesn't have Christians. God's looking for disciples. That means people that have been discipled by Jesus and in turn are going to go out and make disciples of others. That's why the Apostle Paul could say to Timothy, therefore imitate me, just as I imitate Christ Jesus. Mark it. If you church plant, it's going to be a fight. And the Apostle Paul had his back scarred up like a walnut shell to prove it. In Galatians 6:14, he says, therefore let no one trouble me, for I bear on my body the marks of Jesus Christ. C.T. Studd, famous pioneer, missionary, and church planner, once wrote this, I want to live in such a way to where the devil throws a party when I'm dead. That's what church planners do. They come into an area and they pose a threat to the enemy. Therefore, the enemy's coming, and you can mark it like Paul did in Ephesians 6. He's coming to stop you from expanding the kingdom into his territory. The good news is, every opportunity that the enemy tries to make in making your life into a bloodbath is an opportunity for you to plunge sinners into a Jesus bloodbath. And I hear it tell from an old hymn that sinners plunge beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains.